Welcome to the opening line report here on Vegas Insider, the wild card edition. Kevin Rogers with you, and we're down to 14 teams now in the NFL playoffs, 2 being off, that being Kansas City and Philadelphia. They have the bye this weekend, so 12 teams in action. 2 games Saturday, 3 games Sunday, 1 game Monday. And then we'll be in the divisional playoffs next weekend. So a lot to go over with these 6 games and the lines coming out last night. You had the Sunday night game that had a lot of meaning, and the teams that played in that, neither of them go to the playoffs. Detroit and Green Bay, as the Lions beat the Packers to knock Green Bay out. Seattle got the last spot in the NFC. They're going to be facing San Francisco. And we bring on Patrick Everson, who joins us every week here on the opening line report to break down all of the lines, all the line movements, talking to the odds makers, talking to the sharps. And Patrick, it's good to have you on again. And let's start with that Seattle-San Francisco game coming up on Saturday. And look, you have a couple games in the wild card round with heavy spreads, one being the Niners, the other being Buffalo. We'll get to that in a little bit. But San Francisco here, great defensively. They went on a hot streak to end the season, doing it with a rookie quarterback with Brock Purdy. Seattle, I don't want to say slipped through the back door. They won their game against the Rams in overtime, but they needed Detroit to win on Sunday night. Now Seattle's in, but the Seahawks have lost twice to the Niners. So what do you have with this game, Seattle and San Francisco, to kick off the playoffs on Saturday?
Yeah, interesting the way some of these books were releasing numbers yesterday. A lot of, there were a few books that just, or a couple books, I should say, that just jumped on it right away, not even knowing like game times, game days, how teams were going to have to travel and so forth. Not that it's going to affect the line a huge amount, but the Superbook went ahead and waited until literally everything was settled last night. Once that Lions-Packers game ended, and they went out with they sent out 49ers 10.5 at the opening. They were probably one of the first books to go all the way to double digits for that. And I went back and forth with Casey Degnan last night, as I do each week on the opening line report for just the first look at these games. Because usually, honestly, the Superbook is usually one of the first ones out the door with the numbers, but they wanted to wait until all the games were set and they knew the game times and so forth. And what Casey had to say about this one was early on, and this was late last night, obviously, to count about even, but there was some bigger bets on Seattle out of the gate at that 10.5. So the Superbook backed it up to 10. But as he noted, and this will be no surprise to anybody, but he expects San Francisco will be involved in teasers and parlays, obviously money line parlays. So the book, expects to be rooting for a Seattle upset. A little bit of action, he said, early on the over. And so they went from 42.5 to 43 on that.
Now, obviously, a lot of people, Patrick, will look at the season series with these two. And interestingly enough, all 3 quarterbacks from the Niners played against the Seahawks this year, because in week 2, that was Trey Lance started that game. He got hurt. Garoppolo came in, played the rest of that game. Then in the meeting in Seattle, Brock Purdy played because Garoppolo got hurt the week before against the Dolphins. So, people probably look at this, lopsided matchup, because the first time around, a lot of people probably forget this, that San Francisco won 27-7 at home. The 7-point score by Seattle won a blocked field goal taken back for a touchdown. And in the second meeting, it was 21-3 San Francisco before the Seahawks scored some late points to make it interesting. That San Francisco dominated them. But now people say, oh, well, this is going to be easy. What do you think? People are going to jump on Seattle here, seeing this many points, or saying, no, there's too much of a mismatch with these teams?
It's a really good question. I think, as Casey noted out of the gate at the Superbook, they are hitting Seattle a little bit early. I'm going to see if that number at 10 is juiced at all. No, it's just 10 flat. But I'll tell you, the Niners have won a ton of games in a row. They're covering constantly behind a third string. I mean, I look, the guy looks like he could be an NFL starter. I mean, especially with some of what we saw yesterday, over the course of the weekend in the league. I think it's going to be hard to keep the public off the Niners for sure. They've just been, red hot for weeks on end. They've been covering at a pretty rapid pace as well. So I'm sure, probably the sharper side would say take those points, especially in a playoff game among division rivals, which is interesting. I think we have 3 of those scenarios this week. But I think I'm with Casey. They're certainly going to need Seattle in this game in pretty much all forms. Everybody's going to lead off their parlays, money line parlays, teasers, all going to lead with that first game, and they're all going to lead with the Niners.
What's interesting too, Patrick, is that even though we're in the expanded playoffs, and I mean, we'd have to look back when you used to have 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday before they expanded a few years ago. Every game this weekend is a rematch from the regular season. There are no fresh meetings. That, yes, you have 3 division rivals, so obviously they played twice, but the other 3, you had these teams that played earlier this season. And the next game we'll look at is Chargers-Jaguars in Jacksonville, a back-to-back Saturday night special in Jacksonville. The Jags beat up the Chargers back in week 3 in LA. That was a game that Justin Herbert was coming off the rib injury against Kansas City the week before, and he didn't play well. They questioned why he even played, and then Jacksonville kind of ran him in that game. And then it seemed from there, Jacksonville kind of took a nosedive for a bit and then picked up at the end of the season. Tennessee fell apart. We saw how Jacksonville ended up winning the AFC South. Now they get a home game, but also they're a dog here, but also a little bit of line movement because the Chargers opened up, about 2.5, and now it's down to 1?
Yeah, there were some spots. I think DraftKings among them was one of the first out of the gate that I saw in the U.S. legal regulated market. I think DraftKings was one of the first out of the gate, and it was Chargers 2.5, I believe. And like you said, it's pretty much painted to 1 almost everywhere now. And again, as I noted, the Superbook went out late last night with just all the lines at one time once they had game time set. And even with them opening at 1.5, they went to 1 pretty quickly. And what Casey said on this is they got some action on both sides at that 1.5, but he said more respected money on the home dog Jags bumped us down to 1. He thinks it'll be a good 2-way action game as the week goes on, and putting it in that primetime slot, it might, it may be among the least attractive of the 6 games, perhaps Seahawks Niners, I don't know, but the Niners have just been so good and so interesting to watch. But it's in the primetime slot on Saturday night. Obviously no college football to compete against. I think it's going to get bet really, really well. Even though it might be the least attractive of the matchups, it's in a great slot. So I would lean with Casey. I think it probably will be a good 2-way action game. The Jags, as you pointed out, just clobbered Los Angeles in that game. And you're right. There's almost no question. I don't think Justin Herbert should have been in that game. I think that was a really risky move. He got through it, but obviously he didn't look good and the team didn't look good. Casey also said, as far as the total on this game, not much movement as of last night. I'm double checking to see if there was actually it's up a point now. It opened 46.5 at Superbook, and they are up to 47.5. So you've got a healthy Justin Herbert now, and obviously he's pretty effective. And the Jags, I mean, it's just impressive. I think that they got there. Obviously, it required a Titans absolute meltdown. But the Jags were responsible, and the Jags got very lucky on that touchdown. But that said, the Jags delivered 2 of those victories, dealt 2 of those losses to the Titans.
Now, also the Chargers, Patrick. How about this? 5-0 straight up, 4-1 against the spread as a road favorite this year. So when they play teams they should have beat, they beat them. The only ATS loss came at Arizona when they went for the 2-point conversion at the end and got it to win the game. So they didn't cover that one against the Cardinals. But past that, granted, there was a lot of close wins at Atlanta, at Cleveland. There was a lot of very close victories, but LA had that. And again, I know we go to the revenge angle on this. It's almost unfair because that first game with Herbert, he probably shouldn't even been playing in that game. And now you have him as a short favorite. Granted, we're going cross country, but it's a night game. I just wonder with Jacksonville if they can keep this up. Because look at this. Last few weeks, who'd you play? Josh Dobbs, Zach Wilson. You had Tannehill the first time in that Tennessee game, but they weren't playing great quarterbacks for the most part. And then they picked off Dak at the end of that Cowboys game in that pick 6, but they weren't playing great quarterbacks towards the end.
Yeah, I agree. And, it does seem like at some point, the bottom kind of has to fall out of Jacksonville. They're still, only a 9-8 team in a bad division. The AFC South and the NFC South were both awful this year. So or at least not very good. Maybe awful's a little, well, for the NFC South, I don't think awful's strong at all. Too strong. But I like the Chargers preseason, probably a little too much. I think a lot of people like the Chargers preseason. They were kind of the sexy pick that was a little under the radar, but still low, like 16-1, 15-1, 14-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. I got in later on them. I'm sitting here with a 30-1 ticket, hoping that they'll kind of catch fire a little bit. And hopefully, I hope there's some motivation for a team that went to LA and just torched them, as you said, under unique circumstances. But, it seems to me like Jacksonville is due for an exposure game. Like you said, they started off, they got that win over LA, but then they seem to be in the tank for weeks. I think they were 3-7 or something like that at one point. So it's just kind of a surprise it's a real surprise to see them in this situation. A team that had 4 wins combined over the previous 2 seasons somehow manages to get to 9 this season when like I said, I believe they were like 3-7 or something at one point.
They were 4-8 before they won 5 straight. And also the other team I forgot too, during that last stretch, they played Houston too. They killed them. Davis Mills. So really, you played a lot of subpar quarterbacks during this stretch. And look, I don't want to take away from what Jacksonville did.
Sure.
Yes, you needed Tennessee to fall apart, but Jacksonville still took care of its business there. They won those games. They've won 5 in a row. They needed to beat Tennessee on Saturday, the must-win to get in the playoffs. But at the same time, it tells you a lot that the Chargers still going cross-country are going to be favored in this game, and we'll see if it moves or not, if they close it a pick 'em or whatever the case is. But the Chargers laying 1 against the Jaguars Saturday night. So let's flip to Sunday now, Patrick. Dolphins-Bills, the first game on Sunday afternoon in Buffalo. Bills got that huge lift on Sunday with a couple of kickoff returns for the touchdowns, and also the first game back after the Damar Hamlin, after his situation in Cincinnati, which obviously has improved mightily with him, which is great news. Mm-hmm. This Buffalo team beat Miami in Week 15. It wasn't great weather in that game. It started to snow in the 4th. It was cold. Dolphins played well in that game, actually, but then Buffalo got the late touchdown to win. And the Dolphins probably won't have Tua. I think it's fair to say he's not out of the concussion protocol yet. Teddy Bridgewater still hurt. Skylar Thompson, he played on Sunday against the Jets. They didn't score a touchdown. Didn't look good, but they did enough to win that game. Now the Dolphins, a heavy dog against the Bills. You think that people are going to ride Buffalo here, just seeing Miami's ineptitude offensively without Tua?
Right. Well, certainly the public will. And man, this is just to your point. That game between the Dolphins and Bills in Buffalo was a great game. I mean, Tua looked they were trading punches with Josh Allen and Tua Tagovailoa. Tua looked really, really good. If we were getting that, it would be pretty entertaining. However, if Tua had actually been healthy these last few weeks, we might not be getting, this matchup. Miami might be playing someone else. These 2 teams might be playing different teams in this round. But it's I guess to say it's unfortunate. Yeah, it would be nice if everybody was going into this full strength so we could be entertained like we were in that game. It was just a tremendous game. So the Superbook opened this at 11 and Bills 11 again late Sunday night. And Casey said they did take some action at the Bills on Sunday evening, but didn't move it up. He said the line, to your point, is definitely leans much more toward Tua not playing. They're not expecting him to play, which is why this is double digits. And I'm just checking to see. I do think it ticked down a notch. Yes, it went down to 10.5 at the Superbook overnight. So it's down a half a point at this point. But there, that number is premised on Tagovailoa not being available. If somehow they announce this week, and I think you and I agree that it doesn't look like that's what's going to happen. But if somehow he's announced this week, I think there would be a notable movement. I don't know how much it goes down. It goes down some for sure, but a notable movement. They did see some sharp money on the over early on in this at the Superbook to move them off of 43.5 and on to 44, and that's where they're at today.
And the 2 totals, and again, it's hard, Patrick, because you had Tua playing in those games.
Right.
The totals, the first game, it was 54.5 in Miami, easily stayed under the total. Mm-hmm. The second game, with the questions of the weather, destroyed the over in that one. It wasn't even close. Yep. So now it's kind of in the middle, and you're hoping for Skylar Thompson to lead this team to some points. And granted, the Jets are good defensively, and they slowed down the Dolphins on Sunday in that 11-6 game. But in the games without Tua, this team really has not been able to score. But here's another one, too. Dolphins at home, great under team. Dolphins on the road, good over team. So you kind of wonder if that keeps up. Yes, again, Tua is the X factor with him not playing, and we'll see how healthy Tyreek Hill is. He should be fine enough to play. But Buffalo, you got to count on them to get a lot of the points if you want the over in this game.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it initially ticked up. It's not a super high total, but based on what we've seen out of Miami, Buffalo is going to have to do a lot of work. And honestly, if it gets out of hand, they may not want to do that work. They may want to just let off the gas and not have to not take too many risks. Maybe even move some players out if they put the hammer down early and have Miami under control. They may be inclined to get a few players off the field and just stay in, just manage the game basically if they can get strong control of it early.
Now the second game on Sunday, another rematch, Giants and Vikings in Minnesota, and the very little respect the Minnesota Vikings have received due to the scoring differential they've had, which is not good for a division champion. And Minnesota here, a short favorite against New York. The Giants pretty much punted on Sunday, which is fine. They knew they had nowhere to go, so no need to get anybody hurt. But first time around, Vikings beat the Giants on a 61-yard field goal. And now this time around, Giants, one of the best ATS teams in the league. I mean, they were for a while until the Bengals passed them, but the Giants still a very strong ATS team. What about your thoughts on this, Patrick, and what you've heard with, I guess, the lack of respect for Minnesota and also how well the Giants have been ATS factoring into this line?
Right. And the Giants have great ATS. I think they might have even jumped over the Bengals at the end there because the Bengals had one less game. So really just solid. I think 13-4 against the spread. The Giants are. So it's interesting. 9-7-1 straight up, just, one way or the other, pretty close to 500, but just a fantastic ATS team. And they covered against, even though they had, resting everybody and their mother or everybody and their brother anyway on Sunday in week 18, covered they were huge underdogs. They got all the way out to 16.5 and they end up covering after falling behind 19-0. So a good ATS team. And Casey Degnan at the Superbook, he said out of the game, they opened Giants +3, took some respective money right away, didn't move off the number, but went to Giants +3 -120. And now, as you and I talked today on Monday, it's just back to 3 flat. But as you discussed there, this game was just played a couple of weeks ago, very competitive. So Casey said it's not surprising to see the Giants get some early love. He thinks at some point that the Superbook and perhaps others will see the public money, see some public money get on the Vikings. But I'll tell you, I'm not sold on the Vikings at all. And to your point on that scoring differential, they won 11 games. 11 games came down to basically one score, 8 points or less. And I think there were maybe more than 11 games, but they won 11 games that were with a differential of 8 points or less. And sometimes it was significantly less than 8 points. There were some field goal games and so forth, including this first one against the Giants. The Vikings were just really fortuitous. And it just seems like they're so due for a comeuppance. And a lot of people maybe thought, well, they got it at Detroit, which they did. But I just feel like there's more to it. This could be a really tough spot. And the Giants got to rest a bunch of people. And granted, the Vikings got to rest some players too. But this could be a good game.
Looking at the point differentials, which, again, you could say what's fair, what's not. But also, Minnesota didn't have any other team make the playoffs in their division. Granted, Detroit finished above 500. But Philadelphia was +133. Dallas was +125. San Francisco is +173. Minnesota was -3. And they are in the same record realm as those teams. Now, Tampa Bay was 8-9, so it's hard to judge them. Even the Giants were -6, Patrick. The Giants were 3 less on the differential at 9-7-1 than Minnesota was. And Minnesota was helped out by beating Chicago twice. Granted, they split with Detroit and they split with Green Bay, but all these close wins coming from 33-0 down against Indianapolis. The wacky ending at Buffalo where Josh Allen fumbled on his own one. There were a lot of games where Minnesota was very fortunate, to say the least. And then now it's kind of like the argument of, can Minnesota now prove those were, in a sense, I don't want to say that they were lucky and now they could turn it on, or if the Giants beat them, that they just were lucky all year. Like, that's what we're going to try to learn, at least with this first game against the Giants.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look, they could easily be the team that's 9-7-1 going into this game. A 10-7, 9-8. They had a lot of games like that. I mean, they do get the benefit, regardless of their the point differential, the very, just the negative point differential. They get a home game at least, but which I think obviously will help them out this week. But going forward, I think that gets to be a much more difficult road to hoe.
Now, the night game on Sunday, Patrick, Ravens and Bengals, and these teams just met on Sunday. Obviously, Baltimore is a much different team without Lamar Jackson, and they're hoping he can play in this game coming up Sunday night because, I mean, look, they don't have a shot. If Lamar Jackson does not play, they don't have a shot to beat Cincinnati. If he plays, though, they have an excellent chance. And, we were talking about this in the office earlier, Patrick, that Baltimore has 4 losses with Lamar Jackson starting at quarterback this year. That was the Dolphin game. They were up like 28 or whatever it was, 21.
Yeah, crazy comeback.
The Buffalo game, they blew at home. They were up big. The Giants game on the road, Lamar had a big turnover late, and the Giants beat them. And Jacksonville on the road. Those were the 4 losses. Like, you think about, this team is in every single game with Lamar Jackson. When he doesn't play, and we saw that meltdown at the end of last year, it's just not the same team. Like, that's how valuable he is. So what's the thought process with the odds makers as far as basically him being the biggest factor in this game if Lamar plays versus him not playing, where this line goes?
Right. And the Superbook opened at Bengals 6.5. And and what Casey said they premised it on, they feel like Lamar is going to be expected to play, but they don't, the odds makers, the risk room at the Superbook and probably elsewhere, Casey said, we don't feel like he's going to be 100%. Doesn't seem that way. So that's part of what's weighing into the number. It'll be interesting to see what happens if later in the week they're like, okay, Lamar's out. But you're right. He's got to be on the field for this game, I think, to be interesting at all. They haven't seen too much on the side or the total yet in this game at the Superbook. And in fact, I believe they're still sitting, double checking, they're still sitting 6.5, which is where they opened. The total did tick down from 44 to 43.5 over the first 12 to 14 hours that it's been on the board here at the Superbook. But he noted, kind of like San Francisco, the Bengals are going to be really popular in the teaser and parlay market, moneyline parlay market. That they're just the Bengals are extraordinarily public. They've been fantastic. One of the top 2 spread covering teams all season long. Had a huge 12-1 ATS run. So they've become another odds. Scott Shelton behind the counter at BetMGM Nevada told me over the weekend, he's like, the Bengals they've played themselves into being a very public team. The public is really on board now after weeks and weeks and weeks of cashing tickets with them. So, but I think you're right. If Jackson plays, I think even if he's not 100%, I mean, he has a sense about him, an ability about him, even if he's not 100%, if he can be out there on the field. He does have a tendency to make some bad mistakes. And as you pointed out, he did in a couple of those games. At least one of those 4 losses, maybe 2 were some turnovers where he just made some dreadful mistakes where they could have won both of those games. But I'll tell you what, I really like their chances if he's playing. And if he's playing, I'd be inclined to bet on him. I think they might be a good play if Lamar Jackson's going to be on the field. And I'm sitting a little biased. I'm sitting on a Ravens 30-1 Super Bowl ticket, just like I am with the Chargers. I was just trying to kind of early mid-December, trying to find a couple teams that I thought might be, potentially worthy flyer bets, if you will, if they could somehow warm up for the playoffs. When I did that, it was under the impression that it was under the thought process that Lamar Jackson was at least it was after he got injured, but I thought, okay, he's surely going to be back by the end of the regular season. And now he's not been back by the end of the regular season. So it's a little more iffy now.
Yeah, I think if Lamar plays, and again, we don't know the severity of how limited he could be or, the severity of his injury. but I don't see why not. And John Harbaugh's had a pretty good record in these wild card rounds. Granted, going back to 2008, so it's a long period, but he's won 5 times on the road in the wild card round. So we'll see if he can do that again. In Cincinnati, one note on them. I mean, you said how great they've been ATS. They started 0-2 before they went on that big run. That last year in the playoffs, beat the Raiders at home, covered. One at Tennessee, obviously covered. One at Kansas City, obviously covered. And the Rams game, the Super Bowl, they covered as 3.5, 4-point dogs, lost by 3. So this team, going back to even last year, Patrick, in the playoffs, they're a money machine. So that's why it's hard for people to think, even if Lamar plays, why jump off the Bengals bandwagon now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really good point. I think even into the last couple of regular season games last year, they covered as well. So they're just on a huge overall spread covering run, almost all of it with Joe Burrow at quarterback starting. And the one game he didn't start, I believe, was the regular season finale last year against Cleveland. And the Bengals lost that game, but covered there as well. So they're just, like you said, they're basically an ATM going, well back into last year, the whole playoffs and the last couple of games prior to the playoffs last season. So it'll be hard to jump off, and the public will certainly be on him, as Scott Shelton alluded to. But I think if Jackson plays at all, they're definitely worth a look. And I hope he's 100% or very close to it, and he's out on the field. I want to see the defending AFC champs get Jackson's best shot for multiple reasons, obviously. But I'd also like to just really see a good game. And
I just look back at it. 8-0 against the spread to close out last year, 4-0 in the regular season, 4-0 in the postseason. I'm not going to ask you exactly the game. I'll tell you the game, but you'll probably remember it. The last ATS loss they had last year was the San Francisco game at home. They lost in overtime. I don't know if you remember that game. It was late in the season. San Francisco was up 20-6. The Bengals came back, tied it, took the lead in overtime on a field goal. Then the Niners walked off with a touchdown. That was the last time last year they didn't cover. They went on to cover 8 straight after that. So that team it's just unbelievable. Like you said, what they've done against the spread over the last, you're going through 24 games and they've covered 20 times in 24 games.
That's amazing. So, and I'm sure a lot of people have been on him. I haven't been on him much. I certainly wish I had jumped on that train early. That's a tremendous cash out rate. You're making pretty good money if you just are blindly betting the Bengals from late last season all the way through this season.
Now let's look at the final game, and this one's so intriguing.
Yes,
Patrick. I don't know what to think of this. I really as of now, I'm stuck on this Cowboys Buccaneers game because there's a couple things here. Monday night is what they want. You get the Cowboys, Brady, you get all that. All right, Buccaneers beat the Cowboys in week 1 in Dallas, and Dak got hurt that game. That's when Cooper Rush came in the following week, and they won a few games with him, and then Dak came back. Now, Dallas lost that game to San Francisco in the wild card round last year where they just looked bad out of the gate. Dallas came back. You had the thing at the end where they ran out of timeouts, and Dak went to the line, and then the time ran out. But Tampa Bay on the flip side, they just have not gotten it together this year at all. Even though they won the NFC South with a losing record, but they get the home game because they're a division champion. You wonder, Brady can't go out like this, with another loss, but you're getting them with points at home. What are you hearing with this one? Because obviously this is going to be such a huge handle, I'm sure, Monday night to close out the wild card round.
Yeah, no question. This is going to be a massively bet game, and any parlays and money line parlays that make it through the weekend are gonna run to this game, and they may run to both sides. But it's just I saw some people bantering back and forth on social media last night, just saying, look, it's pretty hard for sharp guys. Not that they'll bet the Bucs blindly, especially after a bad season, but it's just hard to go against Tom Brady. It doesn't mean that they're going to bet on the Cowboys. They just might not bet it at all. But what Casey Degnan of the Superbook said late Sunday night, they opened 3.5, Cowboys 3.5. And he said, and this was literally not long, within an hour after they opened, he said, this game has been one-way traffic on the Bucs plus the points from sharps and the public. So they're jumping on Brady's bandwagon, getting points at home. They moved down to Tampa +3 -120. So took it down a half a point and juiced it a little bit at that half point at 3. And Casey said, I think we're going to continue to write money on the Bucs. He said, come Monday night, I would be surprised if we're not rooting for Dallas to win and cover. So that's interesting. I think it's 3. Yet it's still, as we sit here on Tuesday. I mean, we did Tuesday the last 2 weeks, so I got off my holiday, got me off kilter there, Kevin. But it's still sitting on Monday afternoon. Buccaneers +3, -120. So sharp action on Tampa, liking Tom Brady getting points at home, even though the Bucs have had a relatively speaking dismal season, winning the division with a losing record. Now, granted, they didn't go out and play in Week 18; they had nothing to play for. But still, 8-9, 9-8. That's not the record of a division winner. So, but it's not keeping early sharp play and even public guys off of Tom Brady and co.
What about the total in this game? Because you had a 19-3 game in Week 1. They had one touchdown in that game, a lot of field goals, and we know Dallas is capable of scoring. Tampa Bay, we've seen them in the playoffs before. I mean, like last year, the last playoff game, that Rams game, they were down huge. They came back and tied it, and the Rams beat them with a field goal, and that game easily went over the total. But are people expecting points in this game, or probably just we know Tampa Bay can't run the ball, so Brady's going to throw the ball a ton. But is this going to be a repeat of what we saw in Week 1, or maybe what we saw in Week 1 last year in that season opener, that wild game in Tampa? Granted, you have Gronk and you had some other guys out there. You don't have the same guys playing now, but are we going to see an opposite of Week 1, or probably the same as what we saw in the opening week?
It's a really good question. I would say early the lean is something closer to what we saw in Week 1 of last season, which to your point, that was an extremely entertaining game. Just a great, and that was literally the first game of the season. They played each other in the season opener each of the last 2 years, but it was literally the first game. It was the Thursday night game, if I recall correctly, last season, and just a tremendously entertaining game. But the Superbook opened at 44.5 on the total. And Casey said late Sunday night, some smaller bets on the over, but nothing really of note yet. However, today it has gone up a half point to 45. So the first move on it is upward, and hopefully it portends well for an entertaining game. I'd love to see these two teams go out and put it up a little bit. And as you said, Brady's probably going to have to throw quite a bit. Bettors are definitely either convinced that Brady getting points is a real there's real value to that, or that Dallas maybe isn't all that, having to go on the road and play this game. So hopefully we'll be entertained. I don't want to see another 19-3 game, that's for sure, especially, and nobody does. It's Monday night prime time. Maybe people want to see the under, I understand that, but we can get under in a more entertaining game than 19-3.
Patrick, seeing what Dallas did, you could throw out the Washington game on Sunday because the Eagles weren't going to lose. There was no reason to really go all out just to win that game and maybe get somebody hurt and Philadelphia wins. So just settle for the wild card. I get that. But when you look back at what Dallas did, at least late in the season, or the second half, I guess, they blew 2 double-digit leads in overtime on the road at Green Bay and at Jacksonville. Besides that, they were pretty impressive. And the Philadelphia game at home, they were down early. They had to come back, and it seemed like that was, a game that was lost, but they came back and ended up winning. I understand Tennessee, Houston, Indianapolis, they all stink. I get that. You beat those teams. Chicago is not good. They beat Detroit when Detroit was struggling early on. But for the most part, though, this Cowboys team took care of its business for most of the season. And I don't know if it was just an anti-Dallas thing or what, or rooting for Brady, think is going to pull through. That's where kind of the tug of war on this game is, because we're waiting for Brady to finally, well, I shouldn't say him specifically, but the Buccaneers in general, to have this breakout, to become what they were, even if they're not. And also Dallas, it's like everyone's rooting for them to lose. They just want to see them out. But also Dallas, they have the most favorable matchup of anybody, I would say, in the NFC, because you are drawing the team with the worst record.
Yes. No, that's a great point. And so they're really the value here might even be Dallas in this instance. I mean, as you said, it's definitely a very favorable matchup. If you have to go on the road, you're going to play a team that couldn't scratch out wins at the rate that anybody expected. Remember, Tampa Bay at the beginning of the season, they were among the top 3 or 4 teams or so on the Super Bowl odds board. I mean, even with 45-year-old Tom Brady, obviously it hasn't impacted them in the last couple of years. They've been very competitive, a playoff team, a Super Bowl winning team over the last couple of seasons. So it's and the drop off was significant this year. So I'd say that Dallas is in a very favorable spot, and only laying 3 might actually there may be some value with that number. Dallas is. I'm with you. I've agreed all season long that I think Dallas has been a pretty talented team. I loved them when they went up to Green Bay. I think they were short dogs up in Green Bay, and I just loved Dallas there. So, hang on, maybe that's the Vikings game I'm thinking of. I'm trying to remember which game I'm thinking of here. I might be off on that, but I did like Dallas this year, and I do think it's a pretty talented team. And this might actually be a better spot than people think it is for them. Although, as Casey did note, you've got you've got some early sharp play and public play coming in on the short home favorite here, backing, maybe it's the Brady factor. Maybe there are some other factors where they're not all convinced about how good or bad Dallas is. But I kind of like Dallas in this spot. And you even kind of convinced me, as you said, look, this is a pretty, really a pretty favorable matchup.
Think about how much it's flipped too, Patrick, that Tampa Bay was laying 2.5 at Dallas in week 1. Now Dallas is favored on the road here. And again, the records, speak for themselves, but I just find that, that game very interesting coming up on Monday night. Now, quickly, Patrick, the NFL futures market, Kansas City, the favorite, Buffalo second, Philadelphia third. Who do you think there's value in, to win the Super Bowl? Obviously, last year, a lot of people probably didn't give the Bengals a shot to win the Super Bowl. They didn't. But who do you think 1 or 2 teams that maybe have a little bit of value that people are looking at to win the Super Bowl this year?
Right. Well, first off, let me back up a moment. It was the Cowboys-Vikings game. That was the one I was intrigued by. It wasn't because I was remembered. As I said, I'm like, wait a minute, they lost the Packers, which they did. As you noted, yeah, they had a 2-score lead, lost in overtime. Loved them in that Vikings game, and they absolutely torched the Vikings. And that was Vikings on their home field. Again, to all the points that you and I discussed about, are the Vikings, legit at that 13-4 or not? Dallas absolutely plastered them in Minnesota. But it's a good question with all these teams. There's not really value. That's not to say you shouldn't bet them, but Kansas City's going to have a real short number. The Eagles are going to have a pretty short number, and so on. And San Francisco, of course, has just made a great climb up the odds board. If early in the season, San Francisco had a couple of bobbles, and if you were astute enough to get on San Francisco then in the Super Bowl futures market, you got probably a pretty good number, and you're pretty happy with that. I hadn't even looked to see where Cincinnati's at literally right at the moment, but boy, they're red hot, and they may get kind of a good path here if Lamar doesn't play this week, which potentially could happen, or if Lamar is like really limited. So perhaps Cincinnati is as much a value play as you can be when you're red hot, and also, by the way, the defending AFC champions. Beyond that, it's tough for me to say. I don't think that I'm with you. I don't think, or at least I feel like I'm with you. I don't think the Vikings are a team that gets to the finish line, especially once they go on the road. I like the Chargers a lot talent-wise, and they may be in kind of a good spot, sort of similar to Dallas, where the talent should be indicative of being more than a 1-point favorite. But they've had some sporadic play. The coach tends to make. I like how the coach makes risky decisions and goes with the analytics sometimes, but sometimes that stuff backfires. Like I said, it's not like they're under the radar or anything, but maybe the Bengals are that team. Maybe the Cowboys, who are certainly up there. Maybe the Cowboys are that team.
I see Cincinnati 750, 15-2, 15-2, 8-1. They're in that range. The Bengals. Buffalo's at around 4-1, Philly's at about 5-1, Chiefs at about 7-2. Chargers anywhere between 21-1, 25-1. Minnesota at 30-1. Baltimore's interesting at 40-1 because if Lamar's healthy, maybe
Exactly.
they make a run. That's what's tricky about them. But look, Seattle, Miami, New York, Jacksonville. I feel like those are just those are too long shots. You can't do it.
I agree, and I like I said, I'm sitting on a Baltimore 30-1 ticket. If Jackson gets reps in practice this week and is like and looks good and the reports are good, I might take another bite of that apple because I do like Baltimore if he can play because he is such a difference maker, can be such a difference maker in a game. Now, can he get all the way? Maybe not necessarily, but this is what I like about, getting on some of these teams that maybe can get there. Even if they can get to the conference championship game, you may be able to put yourself in a position to hedge that a little bit. I got the Bengals just before the playoffs last year at 25 and, rode that all the way into the Super Bowl. And then in game got in a Super Bowl bet. I think it was after the Bengals went up 20-16 maybe, and got a money line bet in on Los Angeles to make sure I made money. Right. So, if you can find that team or maybe put two or three out there that you think can maybe make it, you might put yourself late in the playoffs or even at the Super Bowl or even literally in game during the Super Bowl. In-game betting is awesome, by the way, where you might put yourself in a hedge position to make sure you can make some money if one of these teams does put it together, if Jackson's healthy and all of a sudden the Ravens go on a run, or if Herbert really gets rolling again. I think it's a neat way to approach it, and there are multiple opportunities there.
Patrick Everson, you could find him on Twitter at @PatrickE_Vegas. Always a great job covering things from the ground floor in Las Vegas. And Patrick, your the open line report, this video, obviously we're going to have up, but also what else are you working on for this week? Now we have a couple weeks left in the NFL season. We've now moved on to the regular season, the postseason. But what else do you have you're working on at Vegas Insider?
Well, we'll probably, there's a few things that have just updated in the last couple of days, kind of looking to some more of these championship scenarios in other sports. We've got an update on March Madness odds. We're really only, 6-8 weeks from that really starting to heat up. So we've got an update on March Madness odds from the folks at BetMGM, as well as on Stanley Cup odds. And I believe my Super Bowl odds piece is updated as well, and NBA Finals. So I've updated all of those just over the last couple of days, or they will get updated at some point this week. So you can look for all those. And again, I definitely got a note between what you're doing and what Joe's doing and so forth. There's a lot of great content all across the board up at Vegas Insider right now and on our YouTube channel. And of course, make sure you follow Vegas Insider on Twitter. Make sure you follow Kevin on Twitter. You guys, there's just a ton of great colleagues doing some really good work that can really help inform you so that when you go to the counter, you just make a smarter wager. We're not going to make sharp bettors of everybody. We're just trying to give everybody a little more information so that you can try and make a little bit smarter bet and hopefully find your way to the pay window on those. And there is just a ton of that every day on everything, whether it's the NFL playoffs or NBA or NHL or what have you. You can't go wrong if you head on over there and just spend a few minutes a day flipping through some of the articles and some of the videos and such.
Patrick Everson, always a great job. And Patrick, we appreciate it. We will talk to you next Tuesday, not Monday, because you have the Cowboys Bucks. So next Tuesday, we will get set for the divisional round, down to 8 teams after this. So Patrick, again, we appreciate the time. Thank you. And we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds great, Kevin.
All right, that is Patrick Everson. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching. And as always, best of luck with your bets.